And welcome everybody to God's Views on Political News. It's so great to see you. We've been gone for a couple of weeks, but we got a little bit out of lockdown and we could get back together and have the show today. Bill, how are you doing?
I'm doing okay. Yeah, I actually got a taco a little bit ago and didn't have to, go outside and eat it. I actually sat down at the table and ate my taco.
Wow. What was
Yeah,
that like?
it was, it was like freedom, you know. Mel Gibson at the end of Braveheart, freedom, so
Wow.
anyway.
Just getting the top. I mean, that's where we've come to. That's where we are, just to get that little bit of freedom. Well, I'm
Yeah.
glad your state's kind of opening back up and allowing you to do that.
Yeah, I am too. I mean, there are people in this state that, feel like the governor is going to end up with blood on his hands, and they think it's way too early. But those are the people who I think, well, they they just don't want to work. Some of them. Anyway, that's just me.
Well, I think it's going to be a long time before California opens back up, but it's good to see that Tennessee is opening back up. And, Texas is opening back up. A lot of other states are starting to creep
Georgia,
open. Yeah, Georgia.
Georgia, yeah.
I have to say, my hat's off to the governor of Georgia. He was talking about how there's like a 171 coronavirus cases in 11 hospitals, and it didn't make sense to stay closed down.
Nope, nope, it doesn't.
Yeah,
I
none of.
mean, it doesn't make sense. So, but that's, I'm sure that there will be a lot of discussion in the months to come about all of that kind of stuff. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I wanted to start talking about is, with coronavirus going on, there seems to be some key players in all of this that have started to emerge. And I wonder, should we start looking at some of these people? For example, Anthony Fauci.
okay, I was waiting for the example, but yeah, I think we should. I mean, let's one thing at a time, you know. I mean, because at this point, outside of those who actually got sick from something, the virus or whatever, and the people who got sick and the people who lost loved ones, this was a big deal to them. I get that, but we're already into this thing, and so they got to figure out how to get things back online, you know. But once they
Mhm.
do that, yeah, absolutely. I think if you're going to put yourself in a position to kind of make those calls and advise the President of the United States to shut everything down, then I think it's you're open for scrutiny at that point, especially if it turns out that this virus wasn't as deadly as we were led to believe.
Yeah, and I think we're already seeing that the right now anyway the numbers are about on par. Oh, oops, sorry, I dropped my mic. 1 second. On par with the regular flu.
Yeah, which you know, it's coulda, shoulda, woulda. But it kind of wish Trump had stuck to his guns on that, because
Mhm.
that's what he was saying from the very beginning. A lot of people were saying that from the very beginning, not just Trump. But apparently, there are those like Fauci who led us to believe collectively that this was far more deadly than anything we've ever encountered. That hundreds of thousands were going to die. And millions perhaps worldwide. And I guess I don't know. I kind of have mixed feelings on it today. I'll probably be a little bit more stabilized as we go farther and get into this and get more information. But it's kind of like the weather, man. They are so sophisticated in their techniques and the things that they have to work with today that a thunderstorm pops up, and everybody is on high alert. And it used to be, you walked outside and you saw the thunderstorm coming in, you knew, hey, it's about to rain. Now, every time something comes up, you're on all these different levels of, threat levels and all this, and everybody gets all, I don't know, on edge. And it kind of seems that way to me. And then if the big storm doesn't come, then everybody wants to stone the meteorologist. I don't know. I again, I guess that to people who got sick with it and people who lost loved ones to it, it's a really big deal, and I appreciate that, and I'm sympathetic to that. It's just, it seems to me that a lot of people were ready to exploit this to the fullest, and they, in some ways, are the winners.
Well, and I want to first say hello to some people. Robin coming in, Gillian and Michael Walker. We haven't seen them in so long. Just want to say hi, Rosanna, and some, let's see, Candace and Lorraine and Wanda. It's really good to see everybody. I wanted to tell you and just say to you, that, President Trump, I mean, you make a good point, but President Trump has been, he's really been between a rock and a hard place, because if he doesn't listen to Dr. Fauci, who's been, if you Google him now, he's coming up as the America's doctor. Okay, that's who he's seen as, and he's been a doctor and working with the administration since the 1980s. So President Trump, if he were to say, "Oh, I'm not going to listen to Fauci," and sorry, I'm having mic problems today. But if I don't want to listen to him, everybody's going to immediately attack him for not listening to a guy who has a reputation since the 1980s. Oh my gosh, he's such a great doctor. But then we find out that back when Obama was president and Fauci was, working with Obama, it's coming out that the back in 2014, and this is according to Giuliani, the Obama administration prohibited the U.S. from giving money to any laboratory, including the U.S., that was fooling around with any type of viruses like we were seeing. It was absolutely prohibited. And he said, despite that, Dr. Fauci gave $3.7 million to the Wuhan laboratory.
Yeah, I heard about that. First of all, man, he's loaded, isn't he? He's got a lot of jack to throw around. Yeah, I'd like to, before I pass judgment, I'd like to hear a little bit more about that, get some more detail. But that's, I think that's worthy of somebody asking some questions for certain.
Yeah, maybe an investigation, maybe, AG Barr looking into that and trying to find out what happened. I know the president, when it was in a press conference, somebody asked him about that, and didn't mention Fauci's name, of course, but just said, back when, and he's like, okay, like 2015, who was president then? So he understands that, and he's already looking into it. But there's so much going on with this. To me, when there's a Wuhan virus, coming out of Wuhan, you have a guy who's a doctor who's going to tell the president what he needs to do. Shouldn't that be disclosed somewhere, that he, back in the 2015, he gave 3.7 to that same, it seems like the same Wuhan laboratory? Shouldn't somebody say something?
Well, for all we know, they did. I don't, not publicly, obviously. It's just now coming out. But for all we know, they did. That's why I say, before I, comment too much, I'd like to, see what happens with this and get some more information on it. But back to the main point, I guess, is that there are people in some very influential positions, and they, as far as I'm concerned, and this is ideal. I mean, I realize it's not reality; it's idealistic. But people who are going to make decisions like this one to shut the country down and throw millions of people's lives into turmoil, and aside from the folks that have gotten sick, you would think that they would be heavily vetted, and that this is somebody that can be trusted to give me information and advice.
Impartial,
that is, right? Impartial.
Yeah.
That is in the best interest of the country. And I'm not saying he didn't. I'm just saying you would hope that would be the situation. So yeah, that's a question I think needs to be answered. What's this all about? Why the tie? Maybe there's some reasonable explanation for it. But I think I'll get it out in a moment. Under the circumstances, he should be more than willing to say this is what this was all about. That's how I see it. They would certainly want the president to come clean about anything like that.
Yeah. And well, it's hindsight, I guess, a little bit, but we're looking at it. The numbers have been way off. that Fauci said was going to happen.
Right.
The numbers, and also Dr. Birx.
Right.
And so when you have that, it's like, okay, if we were looking at a congressperson that was, let's say, buying stock, wouldn't we kind of say at the time, well, wait a minute, if you knew about this, if you've given money to them before, you knew about it, and now you're advising somebody, were you doing that to help out the Wuhan laboratory? Were you doing it to help out the American people? Where are your loyalties? And I think, knowing that, if the president knew it, or even Dr. Fauci, if the president did know it, there needs to have been a public disclosure of that so that the public would feel more confident in what was coming out of the White House and out of Dr. Fauci. And that's just not coming out. And even when it came out the other day in the press conference, President Trump did not mention Dr. Fauci's name at all.
Well, yeah. I mean, everybody needs to come clean on this thing because, here's what's going to happen. Their models are way off, obviously. Their predictions were, thankfully, way off. And, 50,000, 54 or 55,000 deaths, if they're all actually COVID-19 related. Right. That's way under what they were projecting, which, again, we're thankful for that. But obviously their models are wrong. I'd like to know, why do they feel like these models were so trustworthy? But if they keep coming out and doing these kinds of things, and it doesn't turn out the way they say, here's what's going to happen somewhere down the road. They're going to cry wolf and nobody's going to listen. And then it really will be something bad. That's what happens in my estimation. So looking ahead, they really need to get their act together and, find some model that can be somewhat, bear some semblance to the reality of the facts on the ground. Or else, we're going to be back in this situation the next time something breaks out of China.
Well, and that's just it. Will there be a next time, or is this, are they taking advantage of this? Was this all just a test? I mean, coronavirus is real. We've talked about this before, but is it any more real than the flu? Was it made to be this way for a reason? Is there an agenda? And that's, again, it kind of goes back to Fauci. What's his agenda? I know from looking at different research issues about him, he's Mr. Vaccine. He wants a vaccine for everything. He does a lot of work with Bill Gates. They always have throughout his entire career. And I think this is another person that we need to look at. Here's Bill Gates coming out and saying, we shouldn't really blame China. It's kind of a distraction to do that. In the beginning, they did the best they could. They did whatever any country would have done, having seen some new virus they didn't know what it was about, and they've done a good job. And I think anything else is just kind of a distraction.
Well, as far as where it all came from, I mean, it came from China. Was it deliberate? Was it accidental? That I don't know. I don't know that anybody knows for certain at this point. Although we have read some intelligence reports on the intelligence community feel like that it was definitely hatched in some lab in China. But Bill Gates. When you have $1 gazillion, it's easy for you to sit back and say, oh, that's a distraction. It's all these people who've lost all their jobs and don't know how they're going to make their mortgage or if they're going to lose their house and all these kinds of things. Yeah, they might have a little different take on it.
Well, and also, Bill Gates is Mr. Vaccine too. I mean, he's just like Fauci.
Yeah.
He said, this is the time to take the great science we have, the fact that we're in this together. And I really resent that we're in this together, that type of thing, especially if it was deliberately done to us. He says, fixed testing, treatments, and get that vaccine and minimize the trillions of dollars in many things that you can't even dimensionalize in economic terms that are awful about the situation we're in. So that's a distraction. I think there's a lot of incorrect and unfair things said but it's not even time for that discussion. So,
Well, Mr. Vaccine can, go fly a kite as far as I'm concerned, because I ain't taking his vaccine. I'm not taking Fauci's vaccine. Maybe that is what this is all about, to push and, promote that thing, And I know that there are people who, feel like you should get all the vaccines, and, that's why this is America. You can do what you want to do. But if that's what comes out of this, to put everybody in a situation where you're scared to death, and here's the answer: take this vaccine. Then I will say, this really was conspiratorial. This was, at least it would it would be hard for me not to believe it was, But
right.
and I don't want to change the subject too much, but we read something this morning that kind of what you said kind of triggered this. At least it's connected in my mind, because they're all about the science of this thing. And I read that the half-life on the coronavirus in the outdoors in the sun is 2 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And yet all these people are saying, stay in your house, stay inside, when science says this stuff dies in the sunlight. So, what
Well,
is going on here?
Dr. Fauci didn't say that. Dr. Fauci said something else. I mean, it was only the HHS secretary who came out and talked about the sunlight and ultraviolet rays and all that, whatever. And you know how much trouble that got the president into when he started talking about, disinfectant in a different way. And
You
blah,
mean
blah,
reality?
blah. Yes, we can't have that. We got to get back on Dr. Fauci's timetable and Dr. Fauci's statistics. And by the way, where those statistics came from that he used, the IHME, they get their money. They get a lot of their money from Bill Gates, just so you know.
Okay, so in other words, I should put my tinfoil hat on, really, and just kind of when I'm considering
I'm
all
sure
this.
they're just big coincidences, Bill. I'm sure there's no connection whatsoever.
Well, I was talking to somebody the other day, and, who knows what the truth is, But one thing I can say that I've observed, I do think this is a reality, is that people have already been conditioned now.
Mm-hmm.
Scare them to death, and they'll line up to do whatever you tell them to do.
That's exactly right.
And that leads to other things, and I think you know where I'm going with that. That
Mm-hmm.
leads to what Revelation chapter 13 talks about, this mark that people are going to be forced to take if they want to buy or sell. And even some people will be killed if they refuse to take it. But I'm not saying the corona vaccine, when it comes, is the mark of the beast. I am saying that we see how very easily people can be conditioned and pushed to surrender using common sense, giving up their liberties, being told what to do, where they can go, how long they can stay there, and all these kinds of things. All you got to do is scare them to death.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I was that I had found, and this to me is this is pretty scary and should be concerning to some people. This was an article that's written, and the title of it is "The Anti-Vaxxers Movement and National Security." This is by Mark Jarrett and Christine Sublette. And they're saying the America's anti-vaxxer movement would pose a threat to national security in the event of a, quote, pandemic with a novel organism. An FBI-connected nonprofit research group warned last year, just months before the global coronavirus pandemic began. This is InfoGuardNational.org who sent this made this article in June 2019. They went on to say that there are serious public health ramifications and national security interests if there was a naturally occurring pandemic with a novel organism or an infectious disease outbreak due to bioterrorism. Disease transmission is now a global phenomenon because of air travel and open borders. Increasing drug resistance is also another threat. And that was a quote from the World Health Organization in 2018. I mean, these people are all connected. And it goes on to say this poses specific risks for bioterrorism, where lack of trust in government, coupled with fear of vaccinations, will produce gaps in our ability to achieve herd immunity. See, we've ruled out natural herd immunity. Now we're saying you can only really get it by a vaccine. This can be magnified by nefarious use of social media, such as Russian trolls spreading vaccination fears, making it much more difficult to achieve a compliance. As stated before, since vaccines are not always 100% effective, spread of the disease will continue, especially to the most vulnerable. And one of the things they say down here, vaccines work by helping the body develop immunity to an infectious agent that it has never been exposed to naturally. The they imitate a naturally occurring infection by stimulating the immune system to produce both cells and antibodies that will fight the infection. Since this process may take several weeks, there is a window after vaccination where the infection can still produce illness. And listen to this, very important. Also, the elderly and people with weakened immune systems may not respond to vaccines.
Take this, transplant it back to 1933, 4, 35. Exchange the word anti-vaxxer with Jew.
Uh-huh.
This is the argument that the people who would resist having something that they don't know what it is, that you're told that it's good for you, and we've been told that before, and then injecting it in your body and having a problem with that is you're going to be a threat to national security. So then what are they going to do? Are they going to put you in a ghetto and isolate you because to keep you because you're the threat? But then they put you in the ghetto, and then, well, we got to go beyond this. This is the problem. We got to get rid of the problem because this is going to undermine national security. Yeah, I can see it. I mean, I hate to say it, but I can see it, and what I really find frightening, if that's the right word, disturbing at the very least, is the amount of people in the United States, not just the United States, but since we live here, an amount of people in the United States who would absolutely jump on board that argument. Because I've seen them when they were, out and about, and they'll have their mask on, that's fine. They'll have their gloves on, that's fine too. But then they'll walk 25 feet over to me or somebody else and get in our face about why you're not wearing a mask. Yeah. I mean, I realize that there's a big difference between that and what we're describing as far as what happened in the 30s and what could happen in the future. But the mindset is already working in that direction. We're already being conditioned for that. You're a threat. You have to be isolated and eventually dealt with.
Right. And I've heard people say about people who don't want to have a vaccination, you're selfish. You're putting, if you're not wearing a mask, you're selfish. You're putting everybody at risk. But what I just read here was that the vaccines probably wouldn't help the elderly and those who with immune compromise. And those are the people they claim that the vaccination is for. We have to look out for these people because there's no vaccine.
So read between the lines. What are they saying about the elderly? Bye.
They're non-essential.
Right. you know.
And those with compromised immune systems, those are non-essential. They've decided who's essential, who isn't. California, about a week ago, I read that there's a 38-page document that California has that basically says, in the worst-case scenario, they have already set up who lives and who dies. This is not conspiracy. The document exists, and I can get it for anybody who thinks it's a conspiracy. 38-page document by the Democratic leadership that says, in a worst case scenario, if we run out of stuff, like if ventilators in a hospital, here's who's going to live and here's who's going to die. And they say children are going to live, and the elderly, on up. You diminish as you get older in their scale. And it's not fair for you to have, it's called life principle, I think is what they call it. The children haven't had a chance to become adults yet. You have, so therefore it's time for you to go bye-bye.
Well, wasn't it, and I don't want to misspeak, but it seems like it was in Italy where they had reports of doctors who weren't, giddy about it. They were upset about it. But doctors who were saying they were being placed in the position to decide who's going to live and who's going to die, who's going to get the ventilator, who's not going to get the ventilator, those kinds of things. And I mean, that's that's going to happen. Now here's, we'll talk about this stuff, but I want to make sure that we kind of balance this out and talk about some, hopeful things in just a moment. But, still wearing my tinfoil hat. It almost realizing all this kind of stuff and seeing how this article comes out last summer, and then all of a sudden at the end of the year, the first of the next year, you've got this pandemic, and then
Right.
my mind goes to an interview that Fauci gave several years ago and said that there was going to be a pandemic that kind of comes out of nowhere. Was that just an educated guess? Did he know something, given the fact that he donated to this Wuhan laboratory? So wearing my tinfoil hat, start
Yeah.
connecting all the dots. It's like, maybe something was planned here. Maybe this was for some, a trial run to see how people responded to it. And I think that if there were people like that, then they have to be encouraged to see how people responded. Now, they're starting to get a little kickback in some places like Michigan and other places where they've overstepped their bounds. Some of the people are fed up with some stuff. But overall, I think that if someone was really conspiring, let's see what happens. They have to be encouraged by the response they've seen from a lot of people. That's frightening.
Yeah, and it is getting more and more where you see protests that are starting to happen around the country, and which is good. Now, Linda said, what if a database was set up that disallowed unvaccinated people from traveling, buying, or selling? Then we'd be in biblical times of the 666.
Well,
Paula said,
I'm
go ahead,
sorry,
Bill.
we are. I mean, that happens some,
Yeah.
not to the extent that she's talking about, I realize. But to a degree, this has happened in the last couple
Yeah.
of months.
Well, and also in California, and I think it's probably going to go to other places as well. This governor is about testing, contact tracing, isolating, and quarantining, and then ultimately vaccinations. And he wants to set up a database and test everybody to find out who has the antibody, who doesn't, who's had coronavirus, who doesn't, and put it all in an app so that they can trace who you've been in contact with, if that person has coronavirus, all under the guise of, oh, we can call and let you know if you've been around, if you've been too close to somebody that has coronavirus, and we may need to quarantine that person.
Well, this sounds like something else someone was telling me just the other day, and this has a Bill Gates, connection, that
Right.
they want to, this chip that he's funding, that they put it in your forehead or in your hand. Isn't that interesting? And,
Yeah.
and it tells you can hold an app or a phone with an app on it, and it tells your temperature. Are you running a fever? And all these other things. Boy, I mean, it's not that we're getting there. In some ways, we're there. It just hasn't landed in the hands of that person who would use it to get rid of God's people.
That we know of.
That we know of, yes.
Because we've talked about this before. Quantum dot tattoo is what that is. That's kind of goes on the top of the hand and then goes underneath your skin, and it lets people know who's had the vaccine, who hasn't, and all that type of thing. And so really those things, like you said, they're here. They just haven't been utilized yet. And it's scary, to see all this happening. Now, some of the other things, you have to look and see, why are we being told, why is it that government workers are working, but the people who have private businesses aren't working? Why were they shut down and the government workers allowed to continue? Who decided this arbitrary essential versus non-essential? My biggest problem with all of this, we have AG Barr who says, oh, your constitutional rights don't stop just because there's a crisis, pandemic, whatever. So we're going to have the attorneys go out there and we're going to go after some of these governors that have overreached.
Well, I hope so.
Well, Bill, in my opinion, they've all overreached, because governors don't have the power that they have. They don't have the power to shut down your business, tell you to wear a mask, tell you to stay at home, assign a crime to what you've done, and punish you by a fine or putting you in jail for not wearing a mask or going outside of your house. They've all overreached. Every single one of them.
I agree. Some more than others,
Mm-hmm.
Here, just using Tennessee as the example, I was disappointed in the governor, but I'm like, okay, we're going to, understanding this is temporary, we're going to respect, the people that have been placed over us in leadership, as far as the large meetings, things like that. But I am absolutely appalled across the board that they would say, okay, your business can stay open, but your business has to close. As if
Right.
to say we don't have common sense, you know, to if I'm going to go in someplace and this is going on, I need to be careful. That's the thing. And this is a different place. I think this was in Idaho where the woman gets arrested, you know, because her kids are in a park. And then some people say, well, it was staged, it was set up, you know, and all these kinds of things. I don't care. The thing is that they're shutting down a public park as if to say, you, the masses, you don't have any sense, you don't have any common sense, and we're going to legislate how we want you to behave. That's my issue, you know, across the board. And that rises to the federal level too. You know, although, you know, the president made suggestions, I guess you'd say. You know, he made suggestions. You can correct me if I'm wrong on that, but that's the way I understood it. And he left it to governors to make certain decisions. Anyway, yeah, I agree with you.
And which he should have done because they're states' rights according to the Constitution.
Exactly.
He's following the Constitution. People don't like that. They wanted the president to do whatever, but he did the right thing in doing that. Now, as I've said before, some people have asked me, he cannot allow certain states, especially like California, to stay down too long, because if you lose California, which is like the 5th largest income in the United States or economy in the United States, you're gonna see bankruptcies go across the state. You can't allow like Texas to stay closed too long. So at a certain point, if these governors aren't opening up, he's going to have to start putting pressure on them. But I think we've gone way too far over. And just so you know, this is a little aside, but your Tennessee governor has ties with Bill Gates and taking Bill Gates money in education in Tennessee.
Well,
And Bill
if
Gates
that's the case, that'll come up in the next
yeah.
gubernatorial election here.
All you got to do is Google it. It's out there, and it's written, documents about him and education, and Bill Gates saying, "Oh, we're so into Tennessee, we're not going to leave Tennessee." Yeah, and Bill Lee, I think his name, is just inviting him on, and oh, we love to have Bill Gates in here helping us out. Blah blah blah. So, but anyway, I don't know if there's a connection. I don't know anything else about it, but I'm just telling you there is a connection with the two of them. I want to, if Brandon has a video, this is something that occurred over the weekend. This happened in Encinitas, California, and I'm filming this. It's a very short video. I'm filming a little protest, and I'll tell you about that protest and the basis for it after the video show. There's a protest going on right now down at the beach. People want the beaches open. Okay, so in that video, you can see just a small group of people that are down at the beach. My husband and I were out walking. We didn't even know there was a protest going on that day. And there were people that were allowed to go just so far down the cement walkway, but could not step onto the sand. If they stepped foot onto the sand, they were arrested. And 2 men were arrested who stepped foot on the sand. Now, I know there have been some people, Candace, I believe Candace is, let me just see what her name is, Christine Race. She's been asking some questions about this and wanting to know, about sort of the Christian aspect of all of it. And I'll tell you why she's asking some of these questions as well. When I was standing there filming, I wasn't close to those people down there at the beach. I was, as you can see, I'm up the hill from them. So I'm standing next to my husband. We have our dogs. I'm talking to a man who was later on national news. I didn't realize that, but he was, had been part of it, or had at least stood there and watched it. And we were 6 feet apart, and he and I were talking. We were not wearing face masks. I will not do that. I will not comply in doing that, but I was doing the social distancing. Some counties are mandatory that you wear it, and some are not. San Diego is not a mandatory wearing, but I'm not wearing it. Another couple came up on their bicycles, another 6 feet apart from us. We had police officers that came up with masks and gloves on and said, "You're not allowed to gather. You must keep walking." I said no. And they came up 2 more times and told us that we had to walk on, that we couldn't gather where we couldn't gather at all in the whole county. You can't, you're not allowed to gather. We said we are 6 feet apart from each other. We're not leaving. No. Bill, I was willing, and I absolutely mean this. I was willing to go to jail.
I don't blame you. I mean, at a certain point, you know, I don't believe in blatantly defying authority, that's been given, that's over us. But then there comes a point that look, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they served Nebuchadnezzar's government. They worked in the government. They were administrators. And, I'm sure they didn't want to be there in Babylon. They'd rather been back in Judea, but they were there. And as far as we know, there was nothing else written of them that would lead us to believe they were anything but model citizens in the situation that they found themselves in. In other words, obedient to government. But when government said, you're going to have to obey my law, you're going to have to break a larger law, a bigger law, a more important law, they said no. They didn't get violent or anything like that. They just simply stood their ground and they said no. Yeah. And in that particular case, it's Nebuchadnezzar was asking this image to be worshipped, which, by the way, that connects back to the can't buy, sell, all these kinds of things unless you have a particular mark. Right. But the greater law was in serving the government and saying yes to the government, they would have had to say no to God. Our rights, our liberties are not given by the government. They are not decided by the government. Liberties are given to us. Freedom is given to us from the Creator of all things. And I am a staunch believer and supporter of the notion that those things that He gives us, He also gives us the responsibility to defend, to guard those things. And so when it comes to your situation you just described, and there's probably tens of thousands of scenarios just like that going on in the last couple of months all across the United States, then yeah, I think that it was the right thing to do, even from a believer's point of view, to say no. We're not breaking any laws here. We might be breaking your, this edict, but this right. edict has crossed a line. But we're not breaking any laws, moral or otherwise. So I think you were well within your rights and well within what is morally right to say no. And that more people would have that mindset. We don't have to be violent. We don't have to be right. Ugly and right. Vulgar and profane and all of those kinds of things. But just to stand, there, and this is an apples and oranges comparison, mind you. But when it comes to the believer withstanding the attack of the adversary, one of the things that Paul tells us is to do, and when you've done all you can do to stand, stand. Yeah. He doesn't say get violent or protest, in a vulgar, profane way, but stand your ground. I do not believe that is disrespectful to authority, but because when authority becomes disrespectful, we have an obligation and a duty to point that out to the authority. You've crossed a line. And I believe there's a way to do that without violence.
Yeah, exactly. And I wasn't being violent. I wasn't being rude. I was just, I was just being adamant. No.
And I noticed that you didn't go to jail.
Yeah. I would have gone to jail. They'd taken me, fine, because then I would have filed a lawsuit for a violation of my constitutional rights and my civil rights.
Yeah, well, and I hope those two men that stepped on the sand do the same.
I hope so too. And over the weekend, people went out to Huntington Beach and they showed us a Laura Ingraham show last night. And people were more than 6 feet apart. And there were not very many on the beach because just a few went. And the governor came on, oh, well, we're going to get more aggressive with shutting these things down. People in California, when you get people in California standing up and protesting,
you've done something then, haven't you?
You've gone too far. Yeah. And there's already been one protest at the Capitol. It's going to be another one on May 1st. People are saying this is ridiculous.
I saw something, I kind of felt the same way, that I saw something in Madison, Wisconsin. I mean, Madison,
Yes.
Wisconsin is like Libville to the nth degree, right? And I know that some people are in that area that watch us, but they're the exceptions to the rule. I mean, as far as their worldview. But I thought, if you got all these people, thousands, marching on the state house in Madison, Wisconsin, man, you've really gone overboard. So we'll see.
Yeah.
Did y'all hear about the
Well,
93 year
sorry,
old?
I keep having mic problems today.
Or Brandon was asking something anyway.
I was
so-
asking if you heard about it's like a 90-something-year-old couple that went and sat on the beach in California, just the two of them in their chairs, nobody around, and then a cop on a horse came up and told them that they weren't allowed to sit in the chairs because the chairs were permanent, but they could sit in the sand because the sand wasn't permanent. And they're like, the old man was like 93 years old.
I've never heard that one, boy. I would have. Oh my God.
I have to wonder, what goes through the minds of these, these officers and, these deputies that have to go out and enforce this,
Well, there's video of it. It was on the Michael Knowles show on Daily Wire.
Well, the thing of it is, the way I look at it, as I use this example as a psychotherapist. When a long time ago, when I was working for this particular company, and I won't mention it, the person in charge gave a directive for all of us to change records. When you change medical records, right, which is fraudulent. You don't do stuff like that. And I said, no, not going to do it. And other people came to me and said, what do we do, Susan? What do we do? And I said, you don't do it. Because even as an intern, and most of these people were interns at the time, as an intern, as a psychotherapist, you have a legal and moral and ethical responsibility not to do anything. Even if your supervisor tells you to do it, you can't do anything that would harm your patient, your client. And it's like these police officers, in my mind, it's like, you may be following a directive, but you should know legally and morally and ethically what you're telling people to do is a violation of their constitutional rights. And honestly, I went through the police academy. I love police officers, but they should be held responsible for what they're doing. They should refuse to do what they're doing.
Well, I have read reports, from around the country, this sheriff in this county, or this police chief in this county, saying we won't enforce this,
Right.
and I, my hat's off to those people, and I know that some of these, officers are being put in a pretty precarious situation.
Horrible
Right.
situation. Yeah.
But I'm with you. I mean, it's there's a moral and ethical obligation that supersedes some little would-be despot who happens to sit, in the mayor's office or the governor's office or what have you. And but here we are. We've been talking about these.
Here we are.
The last days for all my life. Here we are.
And here we are.
We're maybe in the embryonic state of things, but it's on us. And
Well,
go ahead.
No, go ahead. Didn't mean to-
No, I was just, you had said something about someone was asking, what is the believer's response to all of these kinds of
Right.
things? I'm thinking about, the things that happened leading up to the American Revolution. Before there were any shots fired, there were years spent of people writing to the king, appealing to Parliament. You're doing wrong, you're overstepping your bounds, this isn't right, and trying to come to some kind of a peaceable and a reasonable understanding whereby the American colonies would have continued to be British. It was only when the king and Parliament just said, no, it's our way or the highway. We're going to do what we want to do, and you're going to abide by that. That pushed people off the edge. That pushed people over into a different mindset. And I'm certainly not preaching or advocating for revolution or anything like that. I'm just saying this is just what happens. when you push and you push and you push and you push, eventually somebody's going to say, I've had enough.
Yeah.
And right now, it's peaceable for the most part. Right now, it's peaceful protesting. Right now, it's people raising issues. And hopefully, the Attorney General is going to shut some of this nonsense down. I really hope that this is the administration's response to it and say, no, you can't do that. We're going to get rid of this. I hope so. But, here's where we're going, because that other side that would push and push and push and push, they're aggressive by nature. This is what the tares do. The tares aren't sown in the wheat to coexist. It's there to steal, kill, and destroy. And it will push as far as it can, get away with as much as it can, until there's a little resistance. But they're not going to go away. They're going to come back. They're going to try a different way. They're going to go a different angle. My point is all of this. As God's people, we need to be alert as never before. We need to be sober-minded. We can't be allowing ourselves to be distracted by the cares of life to the point that we don't keep our eyes on the focal point here. So because this is where we're at. We've been called to live in this day and time, and so we're going to have to bring it up a notch or two.
Well, think about this. Some of the governors that are saying, well, if you do this, then you're going to be fined. Like, for example, if you don't wear a mask, some governors are saying, we're going to fine you $1,000 and charge you with a misdemeanor. Now, I thought about this the other day, and I thought, is there any other time that we've done this to people, that we've told them due to a virus or something else? And is there anything akin to coronavirus in a certain ways that we've treated the same? I look at this and I think about tuberculosis, right? And I wrote down some notes here. And in fact, it's highly contagious and can be transmitted from an infected person to an uninfected person, mainly when a person with TB coughs, sneezes, speaks, or even sings, known as airborne transmission or airborne disease. Other people who breathe in that aerosolized bacteria can become infected. When was the last time somebody with TB was mandated that you have to wear a mask in public? I'm not saying they shouldn't, but I'm saying, when did the governor say, or a law that says you have to wear a mask in public, and if you don't, we're going to charge you with a misdemeanor and we're going to fine you $1,000 to $5,000? Why is it's only coronavirus?
Well, it's because the mindset of the people has changed over the years.
Yes.
I mean, this is going to sound crazy, but since you mentioned tuberculosis, growing up, my dad is a big country music fan, and I don't mean the modern country music. I mean old country music.
Yeah.
And one guy was Jimmy Rogers, and he had a song called TB Blues, because he was suffering with tuberculosis. Well, he was going into the recording studio. He was going out on tour. He was doing all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And everybody knew he had tuberculosis, but they didn't shut everything down. I mean, the mindset of people has changed.
Yeah.
And we, there is a generation, and it's not limited to the generation that's coming up. There are those in other generations too, unfortunately ours, where they're like, just tell me what to do. Take care of me, protect me, give me what I need, and tell me what to do. And that's the mindset. That should be foreign to Americans, given that we have been blessed with liberties and freedoms that are partly responsible for this nation being what it is. I mean, ultimately, it's God, But, He's the one who gave us these freedoms so that we can do, so that we can work, so that we can build, so that we can create, and all these kinds of things. But now the mindset has changed, it seems. And we've got people who say, yeah, just tell me what to do. And then there's going to be the Gavin Newsoms and the governor of Michigan and all these others who are going to be more than willing to tell you what you can and cannot do and think they can get away with it. Right.
Right. Well, it also begs the question, what should churches do? I know that there's some pastors right now who are saying, I'm praying about this because we've been in lockdown here since about, March 15th or something like that. We're going on a long time, and there's no signs of things letting up too much. Every now and then they dangle a little carrot, a little silvery thing in front of your face and hope that that'll appease you for a while. But the pastors are saying, we're supposed to fellowship. they're looking around and they're seeing everybody else 6 feet apart, and that's okay. Two churches had to sue California to have the privilege to have drive-in churches. What do churches do? Do churches just lay down and take it, or do churches stand up and lead their flocks with them?
Well, I can't speak for anybody else, but we did what we were asked to do. This congregation here, we did what we were asked to do, and we did it out of respect to the mayor here, and we did it out of respect to the state government, with the understanding that this was going to be a temporary situation. But the governor has said he was going to allow that order to expire on Thursday, which means that we will have services this weekend. And we're not in a situation that we can get everybody in here and keep them 6 foot apart. That ain't gonna happen. We're gonna open the doors and we're gonna meet, and with the understanding, if you come, if you feel like you need to wear a mask, that's fine. If you don't want to shake hands, that's fine. But we're gonna meet, and because what you just said is exactly right. We're to assemble. We need that fellowship. We need that interaction. We've live streamed for a month. And people have been very grateful for that. They've been very thankful for that. They've let us know that. But still, and this is for the local people for the most part, the live stream does not replace being able to, shake someone's hand or hug someone's neck or look into their eyes and have a face-to-face. We need that as human beings. And technology's great, technology's wonderful, but there's nothing going to replace one-on-one fellowship, with one another and collectively with the Father. And, in John chapter 17, Messiah prayed, this was really the Lord's Prayer. He prayed that we as his people would be one with each other, and that we would be one with the Father and Son, just as they are one. And so there is that intimacy. There has to be that intimacy. And when you don't have that, when you're deprived of that, it can do one of two things, I guess. It will cause you to appreciate it even more and desire it more, or it will allow you to be willing to exist in some other reality where you feel like you don't need that interaction, which is, in my view, this is Bill's opinion, it is akin to the lion who, the adversary is a roaring lion seeking whom he may devour. And if you remember Marlon Perkins and Wild Kingdom, when on Sunday night before Disney, when they would go to Africa and the lion would be hunting, he would go and find that one antelope that was by himself, the one that was isolated, not the herd, but the one guy that was by himself, and that's the one the lion would go after. And so I hope you understand what I'm trying to say.
I do.
Here.
Yeah. Wow. And the thing of it is, people too, they're committing suicide. People are killing themselves. There was a doctor recently that killed herself. You cannot be disconnected from people. We were never meant to live alone. God did not intend us to be that way. And, it is, some people say, well, why not just wait? It's going to be a couple more weeks. Why not just hold off and make everybody safe and all that? Again, if the numbers had been correct, if what we were seeing actually took place, and recall, Bill, I know you know this, but we shut down everything. The purpose was so the hospitals would not be overwhelmed. That was the only reason we shut the states down.
Right.
Hospitals aren't overwhelmed. Doctors are getting laid off. Yeah. Doctors are getting furloughed. Nurses are getting furloughed. The USNS Comfort that was in New York, we desperately needed that. They saw 182 patients. Yeah. They're done. They're on the way back.
The county that we actually live in has had six people who it's confirmed cases. And of course, with the news, I have reason to believe, or to question whether or not those are actually, COVID-19. Right.
COVID-19,
but okay, so even if it was 6. We had more people than that in our congregation sick with the flu back in January, or December if it was the flu. But anyway, the point being, if the numbers were doing what they said and everybody was getting sick, and instead of 50,000, it's 100, 150, 200,000. Okay, yeah, maybe we need to give this a little more time, but it isn't, and at what point do you say the what was it, the cure can't be worse than the problem?
Yeah.
At what point does it become the problem, the cure, that is? So, again, I don't know what course others are going to take here as far as pastors and things, but this is what we're going to do, and we've prayed about it, we've thought about it. I can tell you that most people, not everybody, but most people in our congregation are itching to
get back,
to get back together and have that, because, now I want to say this, and I know that some people may take issue with this, but I've said this long before coronavirus. There are things worse than death.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot that I can think of that's worse than death. And I will just say that I am not going to live my life, the rest of my life, this way.
No.
I'm not.
Nope. I hear you. I'm not going to either. And I think some people are afraid and they don't know what to do. And sometimes I think that fear comes out of the fact that they don't realize, or they're just forgetting maybe, that God is in control.
Yeah, I mean, it's really easy, when all you hear in the news and all you see on the news and social media is the boogeyman's going to get you.
Exactly.
Yeah, you start thinking the boogeyman's going to get me, and he's just around every corner, And so we have to get our eyes off the boogeyman, get our eyes back on the Son of God. We need to get our eyes back on the author and the finisher of our faith. Should we be cautious? Continue to be cautious. Continue to be aware that, somebody might have something you don't want to get,
Yeah.
So if it makes you feel better, wear a mask. If it makes you feel better, don't shake hands. If it makes you feel better, stay home a little longer,
Exactly.
But
that's called freedom to do what you want
right,
to do. Yeah.
right. But don't live in fear,
Right.
And ultimately, as God's people, we have to trust God. And I think I'm just simplistic enough to believe that under the circumstances, if God wanted us to stay away from everybody, He'd make sure that we stayed away from everybody.
Yeah.
And I'm also simplistic enough in my faith to believe that if we're not throwing caution to the wind, but we've approached this very carefully, cautiously, prayerfully, and we're making some decisions that are not selfish, but are for the good of the body at large, then I have to believe He's going to honor that. I have to believe He's going to watch over us. I have to believe He's going to protect us. Because if I can't trust in Him, what is there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I do think people are going to take even more precautions than they ever did, meaning they'll wash their hands more, they'll sterilize things more, and that's not a bad thing.
That's not bad.
And it'll help a lot of other viruses, like the flu and the colds and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly.
But shutting you down and telling you that your life is going to be confined in a house, and you're not going to. Some people they're not even supposed to go outside, which, you'd have to shoot me the first day on that one. So,
Yeah.
So people have to get to some point where they have to be able to live. And for some people, I think it gets to be too much for them when they're so confined. And except for people like Michael Avenatti, he's out of prison now. Michael Cohen, he's going to be out of prison now. So all these people are I thought being confined was the best place for them. So you can see how crazy and upside down so much of this is when you're letting criminals out and you're confining the citizen, the law-abiding citizen.
That pesky Bible. It keeps telling us exactly what's going to happen, and we just refuse to listen. You know,
I
it
know.
tells us that good will be called evil and evil will be called good. You know, so the world is upside down. So, you know,
It is upside
there
down.
you go with that Bible thing. It's always kind of getting in the way of what we want to
Oh,
do. But
I
anyway,
know, I know. And thank God literally that we have the Bible, that we know what's coming as believers. We know if we will only put fear aside, put our faith in God, read the Bible, you will know what's coming. God has is scripted everything for us out.
there's a passage in Amos, Susan, that says, "Surely the Lord God does nothing except he first reveal his secret unto his servants, the prophets," which just boiled down tells me he wants his people to know what's going on. He wants us to be
Yes.
aware. And why? Not that we would run and hide from it, but that we would be prepared for it so that we can overcome it, so that we can continue to be what he's called us to be. And he's not called us to crawl away and hide away, never to be seen again. We are to be salt and we are to be light. And that always is within the context of as an example, as a witness, as a representative of him to those who are in fear, to those who are dwelling in darkness. So
Right.
we can't negate that. We can't abandon that duty.
Right. And like today, what I've done, what you choose to do and everything, we're not telling anybody else what they need to do, what they
No.
should do, or anything else. All we're saying really that we're thinking that you should do is to read your Bible and go to God when you have a question about what it is that you should do.
Right.
And also contact a pastor if you want to speak to them about what should I do. But I for me, I am just not going to be one that stands back, watches my rights be violated, watches the rights of others be taken away. I'm not going to be in a drive-through church where the pastor stands 15 feet away, which is it's unfortunately happening in the Tennessee church,
Yep.
stands 15 feet away and says, "Hey, do you need any prayers? It's all private." So I just, I want to do what God wants me to do, and that's who I answer to, I guess, is
Well,
my bottom line.
I think we could summarize it this way. You know, Joshua said, "I don't know what others are going to do, but as for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord."
Serve the Lord.
And there's a way to do that. So,
Absolutely. And we had other topics today, but we didn't get to them. This was too important a topic not to continue on. So thank you guys so much, everybody, for being here today. It's so good to see you again after a 2-week absence, and stay safe. God bless you for being here. Thank you for sharing the show with everyone. And until next week, take care.